This is NewsMax TV. I'm Ashley Martella. We're joined in New York City by patient advocate and NewsMax contributor Betsy McCoy, one of the few people who's actually read all the Democrats' healthcare overhaul proposals, including the current law. She's also a former lieutenant governor of New York. Nice to have you back with us again, Betsy.
Thank you, and I brought the law with me just in case you'd like to discuss some specific sections.
Okay. You've been a staunch critic of Obamacare long before it became law. Are House Republicans taking the correct approach in trying to repeal or otherwise eviscerate it, in your opinion?
Yes, for two reasons. First of all, the November election was largely a referendum on this health law, and the candidates who pledged to repeal it won the support of voters in many parts of the country, so they have to keep that pledge to vote for repeal. But secondly, even more importantly, the new Congress opened by a reading of the U.S. Constitution. This law shreds your constitutional rights, so members of Congress have a duty to repeal it.
Part of the Republican strategy includes refusing to fund parts of it, including the 18,000 new IRS agents the law calls for to enforce the mandatory purchase of health insurance. If the individual mandate should fall either by defunding or struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court, is that pretty much the end of Obamacare?
Well, the individual mandate is key to this law. In fact, the authors of this law consistently argued while it was being passed that they could not provide health insurance without compulsion. So the authors took out something that's generally found in complex legislation. It's a boilerplate provision that says if some parts of the law are struck down by the courts, the other parts remain enforceable. They removed that from this law because they did not believe that this law could stand. They were convinced that it would fall like a house of cards if compulsory insurance were struck down by the courts.
A new AP poll shows opposition to the law easing, with strong opposition now at only 30%. What do you think is happening, and do opponents need to make a stronger case against it?
Well, what's happening is that the Obama administration and many of the legislators supporting this law are lying to the public. For example, I was on Fox Business News last night right after Congressman Charlie Rangel, who told the audience that preventive care is free under this law. It's not free. You're simply compelled to pay the full cost of it in your premium rather than paying a copay when you choose to go get, for example, a mammogram.
Michigan Representative Mike Rogers says some of the Obama administration's closest allies, over 200 unions and corporations, have been granted waivers to Obamacare. Now, the list ranges from the Service Employees International Union to McDonald's. As a constitutional scholar yourself, what are the key issues here?
Well, the key issue is that under our system of government, the law is supposed to apply equally to everyone. But unfortunately, the Obama administration is moving in the totalitarian direction. It's who you know rather than whether you are duty bound to obey the law. So some companies get waivers, other companies don't. There's no rhyme or reason or a way to describe why some deserve it and some don't. And that is really the end of the rule of law and our system of government.
Insurance premiums have already risen in many states. How much damage has Obamacare already caused as you see it?
Well, certainly it has forced up premiums. Look, there's no tooth fairy. When the law requires insurance companies to cover more, or in this case to eliminate lifetime caps on what they'll pay out when you're sick, or annual caps on what they'll pay out when you're sick, you have to pay more. If insurance companies eliminated the cap on what they pay out under your homeowner's policy or your auto policy, you'd have to pay more for those policies too. The more you get, the more you have to pay.
Advocates of Obamacare claim the repeal would add $230 billion to the deficit. What do you say to that?
Don't be bamboozled by that argument. The fact is, whenever they talk about increasing or reducing the deficit, it's really a shell game. When they want to decrease the deficit, they talk about raising your taxes. What Obamacare does is it raises your taxes, raises spending slightly less than that, so they're arguing that it reduces the deficit. Repeal very clearly will lower government spending, right? It will lower your taxes. It will restore Medicare funding to its proper level to ensure safe care for the elderly. And most importantly, it will protect your rights.
What about doctors' position on this? They say, that, of course, doctors are overwhelmingly opposed to the healthcare law. Some say they will have to be more restrictive in treating patients now. Specifically, what do they mean?
Well, this is the most unfortunate part of it. Under this new law, the government is put in charge of your care. Section 1311 specifically empowers the government to dictate how doctors treat privately insured patients. So even if you have Aetna or Cigna or some other health plan, your doctor is actually going to be dictated to by the federal government. And that is really a problem. And you can see it in the articles of Dr. Donald Berwick, newly in charge of Medicare and Medicaid. He actually wrote an article called Epitaph of a Profession, arguing that doctors will no longer be able to make the best decisions for their own patients. They should follow protocols, electronically delivered protocols on what's good for the typical patient. Of course, you're in trouble if you're not typical.
All right, Betsy McCoy, her columns appear on the NewsMax website regularly. We invite you and actually recommend that you read them. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts here with us at NewsMax TV.
You're quite welcome.
And thank you for watching NewsMax TV.